Welcome to my IELTS Classroom, the podcast where two English experts talk all things IELTS. I'm Shelley Cornick.
And I'm Nick Long.
And today we are looking at 6 reported essay topics from 2022. Which topics are old, which are new, and how would Nick and I approach each of the 6 questions? Good afternoon, Nick.
Good afternoon.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling much better now, thank you very much.
You were very sick, weren't you?
Yeah, it was actually. It was pretty bad. I was in bed for a couple of days. And on Wednesday I was feeling pretty bad, but I still managed to get up and teach the live lesson. We only had one student.
Did you?
We did, and she had to leave after 40 minutes. But she did very well. It was a reading live lesson.
Nick. Yeah. Dedication. Teaching from his deathbed. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you're feeling a bit better today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Today, as you've been sick
mm-hmm.
and as I've been busy, I thought, what could we do to cheer ourselves up? What is everybody's favourite type of podcast episode?
Recent questions.
So I have been trawling. Well, I've been gone back through all the emails that our own students have sent us.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a look online and I have chosen 6 questions which I think are interesting for different reasons.
Okay.
Now, if you are a long-time listener, you will know Nick and I do this type of lesson, every 3 or 4 months?
Mm-hmm.
First thing, more or less, first thing we need to say is nobody can predict what questions you are going to get in your exam.
Mm-hmm.
We had one of our lovely students last week, Nick, said to me, is it worth paying? You know, there are people who advertise like, hey, give us your money. We'll tell you what question you're going to get in your exam, right? He said, is it worth paying those people money for the questions? It's a scam. The answer is no. Nobody knows ever what the questions are going to be in a test, particularly if you're now sitting the computer-based test, because every single person in that room will get a different essay.
Oh, really?
question.
Is that how it works? I didn't know that.
And that's why I think so many questions are popping up now. Because previously, you know, if we think back even 4 or 5 years, there were only, you know, tests, every other week, paper-based tests.
Yeah.
And then you would get the same question, you know, everybody was getting the same questions. And those questions didn't appear in the same country, but you might find that, you know, a question that appeared, I don't know, in India at the beginning of January
would eventually appear somewhere else,
Yeah, in Australia at the end of January. But now, with the computer-based tests, they are just taking their bank of questions, which must be thousands, and just recycling them.
Wow.
That said, we do see the same questions, or at least the same topics.
Same topics, definitely.
Yeah, appear again and again. So it is definitely worthwhile, you know, investing a little bit of time to see what the topics are that come up. For the ones that you maybe are not very familiar with, what could they do, Nick?
Have a look at some articles online to read about these topics, get some ideas.
Exactly, as we taught you to do last week or 2 weeks ago?
A couple of weeks ago, I think.
2 weeks ago. So if you don't know how yourself to find good ideas for essays, spoiler, it's not finding model essays. They're usually terrible, right? Go and have a listen to the episode that Nick and I did on, it's called Architecture, how to build IELTS essays, because we looked at that particular topic.
We did.
But we'll show you, you know, how to Google, how to decide if an article is good or bad. That's what you should be doing. So, as always, a disclaimer. The questions we're looking at today, these have been reported by students. I have edited all of these questions to make them look and feel what I think is as close as possible to the original question. But sometimes I had to remove phrases or remove words because I didn't think it made much sense. These are not word-for-word copies of questions, okay? These are our best attempts to recreate questions from the test. So if you're working with a teacher who's marking for you, I would say don't use these questions for your marking. Continue to use the questions from the Cambridge books. There are 16 books. They've each got 4 questions. Well, let's say the first 5 aren't very useful, but there's at least 10 books with 4 questions in each. So that's 40 questions. That's more than enough, okay? Don't waste your money paying someone to mark from a question which is not genuine. So I really want to say that strongly. Before we start, I would strongly recommend, before you listen to Nick and I give our ideas for the essays, have a look at the questions yourself and, give yourself 2 or 3 minutes for each question to come up with your own ideas. And then you can come back and compare them to what Nick and I do. And if you do that, I think you're going to get much, much more out of this episode than if you just listen to Nick and I. Because usually, if we've done it well, we make it seem easy. So, Nick, let's get going. Here is our first question. As always, you have the nicest voice. You can read it for us.
Some people think that schools should select students according to their academic abilities. Others believe that it is better to have students with different abilities studying together. Discuss both views and give your opinion.
So, the big topic of education is a very, very common IELTS topic, isn't it? Right? We have loads and loads of education questions. I don't think I've ever seen this question before, though.
I've not seen anything like that, no.
Yeah, about how to group students. So, I've chosen this because it is a new kind of variation on the theme of education. But there was another reason why I chose this question. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to guess, actually. But if you just quickly think, we've got the two views, so we're going to have arguments for both sides. So, we need some arguments why it's good to teach students in levels, I guess, according to their academic ability. And then we need some arguments why it's better to mix students. Off the top of your head, do you think one of those sides will be easier or more difficult to brainstorm ideas for?
I do. I think the first side probably will be easier.
This is what I think. So the reason I've chosen this is I think it's a really good example of a discuss both sides where for one of the sides, it's pretty easy to come up with ideas. So why don't we start with that side? So, why would it be a good idea to group students according to their academic ability?
Because you could teach them according to their ability.
Yeah.
So the material would be understandable to everybody.
Yes, that's true, actually. So, and then you could maybe think about, for the higher sets, they can do more advanced work, extend things, maybe do, I know, work which is even for like a higher age group. But it's also good for the lower levels as well, isn't it?
It is, because the teacher can work with them at a pace that's good for them.
That's a nice,
and they're not going to be
right
introducing
pace.
Material that's too difficult.
Yeah. So, definitely I think the first one is that, you can choose material which is appropriate for the level.
Yep.
So we could talk about higher levels and lower levels there. Maybe for a second clearer idea. You could have sort of like that one idea and you could separate it. It's good for higher level students, it's good for lower level students. If you wanted, though, a second completely different idea, I don't know, first thing I'm thinking of, it could be good for the confidence of the student. So
yeah.
Weaker students don't feel awkward and uncomfortable. Also, maybe more academically gifted students don't feel like they're being held back, maybe, or frustrated. So you could talk about sort of maybe like emotionally, it may be better.
That's good. I
for
like
the students.
That. Yeah.
So I think for those, for that side, the ideas kind of pop up. But for the other side, why would some people say no? Let's keep everybody together. I think that's trickier. So my advice for this, and I did think of this yesterday, but my advice for this is, if you're being given like a question like this, where you're asked to imagine sort of like two different approaches, I would try to actually imagine what the consequences would be if you took each approach. So as we just said, the consequences of teaching students according to their academic ability is that we can select materials. People are going to maybe feel emotionally better. But let's imagine, Nick, if you're sitting in a classroom and you have been told, I don't know, you are in the lowest set. This happened to me in German, right? If you're in the lowest set for any kind of subject, how would that make you feel?
Or why should I even try then?
Yeah, exactly. Which is exactly what I did with German, which is why.
With French as well.
Did you? So after 5 years, I could literally say, wo ist die Toiletten bitte? That's about my only German. So I guess you could imagine, okay, well, if this happened, if we put everybody in the sets, what could the negative consequences of that be? Because the negative consequences are kind of the arguments for not separating people. So yeah, it could be demotivating for the lower levels. Would there be any other reason to keep people mixed together?
I would say the high tide raises all boats argument.
Oh, beautiful. Yes. What does that mean?
So if you've got like the brightest, or a mix of people, the brightest people, in theory, could drag up the rest with them.
Yes. I think that's very
like
true.
If you force, for example, like brighter students to work with other students who are not so bright, that they can sort of help them and explain things a bit more clearly than the teacher maybe.
And I actually think there's been a lot of research about that. If I know that, you know, the education system, which always gets rated as the number one in the world, is Finland. And that's the country where they start at 7 and they always have mixed classes.
Interesting.
And I think, although, you know, there may be 1 or 2 students at the very top who may be held back slightly, and there might be 1 or 2 at the bottom who still struggle to keep up. For everybody else in the middle, as you just said, I think having that connection between the different levels raises the overall total level of the class. Yeah, very good. My other argument would be is that when would you decide these levels? Because I don't think people's levels are fixed.
That's true. Yeah.
There are some students who might find, I think, like, if I think about my niece, she really struggled with maths when she was 6 or 7, and now suddenly at 9 she's like one of the top in her class for maths. So, you know, maybe some students are sort of like late bloomers, they start a bit later. Yeah, I think that would be my second argument. It's like it could be, you know, difficult, particularly as well in the middle. You might know who's at the top and the bottom, but if you've got like levels 2, 3 and 4, they may be all very similar, mightn't they? It could be a little bit arbitrary, like how do you test them to decide which levels they go in?
How and when is good, I would say. Yeah. Because it can change. It can
Definitely.
Change.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there are then quite a lot of, you know, like you said, so there could be the demotivation aspect. There can be, you know, the overall level of the class will be higher if everyone's mixed. And also, you know, how or when will people be divided? But I have to say, I don't know what happened at your school, Nick. Was everyone together or were they separated?
No, we were divided by ability from year 8 in some subjects and from year 9 in all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think this happened to me until I was 13.
Yeah, about 13, 14 they divided us by ability, yeah.
So I don't know, I used to like it when everybody was together, to be honest. It felt a bit richer experience. Okay, on a difficulty level then, from 1 to 10, 10 being eye-wateringly difficult and 1 being, woohoo, thank you, IELTS. Where would we put that?
I'd put this probably about a 7 or an 8, I think.
I would as well.
I mean, it's not super difficult, but you definitely need a bit of time to think about it.
And also, I think some of the ideas would be quite difficult to articulate
it's not the
in 2 or 3 sentences. Yeah. So, yeah, quite tricky. Okay, let's move on then to the second one.
Okay, the second question is, governments should give a basic income to every citizen, whether they are employed or not, so that they have enough money to live on. To what extent do you agree or disagree?
So, Nick, why do you think I've chosen this question?
Because it's a relevant topic at the moment.
It is a relevant topic at the moment, and it is, I would say, it's definitely a new topic.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I've not seen that before.
And it is very, very pertinent to what's happening now in society. My worry is that for some students, this could be something they have never, ever thought about before.
Possibly, yeah, that's true, depending on where they live.
Yeah. So now there's actually a word for this. If you know this word, it's going to make it much easier for you when you're answering the question. What is the name for this idea that everybody in a society should be given some kind of money from the government?
Universal basic income.
Universal basic income. And this must be the episode where we talk about Finland. I think actually in Finland...
They tried it.
This has already been trialled. So... You know, I would recommend, if you have never heard the words universal basic income before...
UBI.
UBI sounds like someone from the West Country. If you've never heard of universal basic income before, what should the students probably do?
Google it.
Google it. Have a look. Now, Nick, I haven't Googled it, but I've got a little bit of knowledge. So what do you know? What is the sort of theory or the principle behind the idea of universal basic income?
Well, the idea is that if everybody got €1,000 or dollars, for example, every month, then nobody would struggle to live.
Yes. And I think probably this idea has been born now from the fact that so many of our jobs are now being automated. And so, you know, there is a chance that in the, you know, not so distant future, many blue collar jobs, so, you know, factory work, that kind of thing, is going to disappear and it's all going to be automated. So I think universal basic income, the second idea behind that is also that, you know, it's sort of preparing us for a world where there may not be work for everybody. But people will still have enough money to survive. So, that's the background. Well, to what extent do you agree or disagree? So we can come up with ideas for both, but, you know, at first glance, Nick, what would you choose? Would you agree or would you disagree?
I would disagree.
Would you? Brilliant. Okay, so why would you disagree?
Because if everybody gets 1,000, for example, euros a month, then within a year or two, the prices will have gone up by that much. So it will make no difference.
Oh, wow. So what? So there'll be just huge inflation?
Basically, yeah.
Oh, Nick, that's brilliant. Right. So that money is just going to enter the economy and everything's going to get more expensive.
Exactly.
And therefore that £1,000, like the value of that £1,000 or whatever it is, will be wiped.
It's going to disappear, yeah.
Oh. People at home, you should listen to Nick. That is a great argument. Yeah. Okay, so if that was one paragraph, what would be the next one?
The next one, I would say, is that it doesn't actually solve any problems.
In what way?
I think that now this is a trickier argument, that because the other one is a simple, like fairly straightforward argument. This leads to this, where the second argument I would make is probably going to be something like connected with mental health, maybe, or something. That just because someone gets €1,000 a month, it doesn't mean, you know, if they don't do anything, if they don't have anything to do, like a job, for example, then it's not going to make their lives any better because they'll still won't have a purpose, basically. I
think that's interesting you said that, because I would have gone with something psychological. I would have probably said that it would have some sort of like negative psychological effects. Maybe an easy thing to say with that, people would be less motivated. So, you know, if you're going to get 1,000, and I do know that this is a problem in Finland, actually, because they have such high payments for those people who are unemployed. There are many people who just think, well, what's the point of going to get a job? Because I get 1,000 or 1,500 euros a month without a job. And with a job, I only get 2,000. So I think there's definitely a lack of motivation. And you could also then say, without working, they're going to feel they lack a purpose, pointless, and it could lead to higher levels of depression, alcoholism. Again, in Finland, that's why, I don't know if you've been to Finland, Nick, it's very difficult to buy alcohol.
It's the highest rate of alcoholism in Europe, I think, actually.
They have special shops that are only open at very, tight, like not very many hours of the day.
And it's very expensive as well.
It's super expensive. So I have to say, you have persuaded me to disagree, actually. I think that inflation argument is genius because it's true and it's not that difficult to argue for, is it?
Not really.
If you were going to agree, I mean, I guess we could maybe have one paragraph that does talk about, you know, automation, the future of work. We could use that as an argument, you know, in the very near future, you know, full employment is very unlikely as so many jobs get taken by robots. I guess the other thing could be,
we could say it gives people more freedom, more choice to do what they want. Like they could work a part-time job instead of a full-time job.
Yes.
Or something like that.
I listened to something recently which was talking about, you know how sort of like, Nick, in sort of like the 80s and 90s in England, we had so many amazing musicians. Like we were really famous for our music. Also, like you think about all the comedians that came out of England in that time. What I read was that the reason that we had such a flourishing art scene was that most of those people were essentially living on unemployment benefits. But then they had the freedom and the creativity and the space to do other things. Yeah, to like be a musician or be something. So you could maybe have an argument like that. Like it gives people more freedom. For the unemployed, they've got enough to live. And even people who are employed, they could use that, I don't know, to sort of take more holiday. Or, I don't know. I think you're right though, Nick. I think inflation is the key. However, interestingly, if you're not sure about how to Google universal basic income and see how long it takes you to find Nick's idea of inflation. I reckon if we Googled it, it will come up really quickly because that is such an obvious drawback. It's just not one that I'd thought of. So snaps for Nick. Snaps. Very good there. Okay, so let's move on then to number 3.
Studies have shown that many criminals have a lack of education. Therefore, some believe that the best way to reduce crime is to educate prisoners so that they can find work after they are released. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement?
So, if you have been with us for a long time, you should be able to recognise, well, especially if you're one of our students on the course, I would be very angry if you don't recognise. What do we call this type of question, Nick?
Best way question.
A best way question. So they are telling us the best way to reduce crime is to educate prisoners so that they can find work after they are released. So this is a kind of like a common IELTS format. They will give you what they think is the best way. And our job is not to agree or disagree that it's a good idea, is to agree or disagree that it is the best way to do something. So usually, Nick, when we have a best way question, how do we usually tell students to approach this type of question?
We usually say that the best way to do the best way to do it is to disagree.
Why?
Just because it's the best way to present different ideas. If you agree, it can be quite tricky to introduce the other ideas effectively and clearly, can't it?
Yeah, because essentially, what you're doing, if you're saying something is the best, your job then is to basically
prove why it's the best.
That it's better than any other solution. And I think, trying to prove that anything is the best is quite difficult.
Yeah.
So what we would usually say is to argue it's a good way.
But I don't think it's the best.
And then we can offer an alternative in the second paragraph. Yep. And really, it doesn't really matter if it's the best or not. By organising in that way, you get one paragraph where you talk about the way that IELTS has given you. And normally it's quite easy to talk about,
the
that way in one paragraph. And then in the second paragraph, you're going to choose an alternative way and you're just going to talk about it in one paragraph. So you've basically got one paragraph for the IELTS way, one paragraph for another way, which you think is better. Simple organisation, simple thing to do, easy then to have a very, very clear opinion, happy days. Yep. However, why do you think I've chosen this one as, I would say, an interesting best way question?
Because it is a pretty good way, isn't it?
This is the thing. I mean, to be perfectly honest, if someone came to me and said, what do you think about using prisoners' time in prison
to educate
them, I'm going to go, oh, yeah, actually, that is a pretty blooming good idea. So we could just say, yeah, it is the best way. But then you'd have to think of 2 arguments why it's better than any other way. And I think that's quite difficult because I can imagine talking in one paragraph why it's quite good. Because, if they're not educated in prison, they're just going to make friends with other people who are, they're going to probably spiral down. That's the classic Daily Mail argument, isn't it? That, prison is just a training ground for more crime. But I still want to try and use the best way here. So can you think, Nick, of a way while we can say it's good, but what could be better than educating prisoners in prison?
Well, I think maybe to do that, I would not focus on the education aspect. and I would focus on the reduced crime aspect of the question.
Ah.
And my other argument would be proactive rather than reactive policing.
Oh, it was great. Tell us more about that.
So, I don't know if you remember when you were young,
Yeah.
but there used to
It's a long
be
time.
Bobbies on the Beat in the UK.
Yeah, they were.
And we don't have that anymore now. So basically, what happens in the UK is if a crime is committed, you call the police, they come, they take a crime number, and they say, well, maybe we'll catch them, maybe we won't. They can't unburgle you. They can't unbeat you up. So everything's reactive in the UK. That's how it works. It's all very administrative. Whereas when I was young, and when you were young probably as well, it was really common. I remember the police constable who used to be in our area, PC Rogers.
Yeah.
And I would say it was definitely true that having police on the streets and integrated in the community does reduce crime.
Yeah. So you're going to focus not on the education, because it says the best way to reduce crime.
Exactly, yeah.
So you're going to say this is good, but it'd be much better to have community policing.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Okay. That is actually, Nick, you're on fire today. My idea off the top of my head was maybe in the first one to talk about educating, people in prison.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good time. They've got nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm.
You've got captive attention. They're more likely to focus. However, then the next paragraph, it's too late. If they're in prison, they've already committed a crime.
Exactly, yeah.
So maybe I'm going to focus on education, but maybe we should have a stronger focus at school
It's a good
on
one,
encouraging
yeah.
who are less academically gifted to maybe take up a trade or an apprenticeship or something like that.
Yeah.
But again,
I do think it's better to disagree here.
I always think, for a best way question, if you agree, I think it can be really difficult to come up with two separate arguments for why it's better than any other way.
Yeah.
So you're going to focus on just we can reduce crime in a different way, and I'm going to focus on we need to educate, but that's
Before
at an earlier stage. Yeah, either way works. Okay, but I would say for any best way question, it is best to disagree if you can. Okay, good. Nick, well, let's see how you get on with number 4. I mean, I'm not even sure I need my ideas. You just go for it. What have we got for question number 4?
Some people think that enjoying the present is more important than planning for the future. To what extent do you agree or disagree?
So, I chose this question, Nick, for 2 reasons. One, very philosophical.
It is, yeah.
Very philosophical. The type of question where you're probably going to want to come up with very, very nice concrete examples to make your arguments clear. So I would think about, situations when it's better to enjoy the present, but other situations where, you have to plan for the future. So, off the top of your head, would you agree or disagree with this?
Probably disagree.
I actually think disagree, even though in my heart, I actually think that this is right and I always try and enjoy the present. But for an IELTS essay, I think disagreeing is going to be easier here. So what would your arguments be? Why is it better to plan?
I would say that, my first argument would be that delayed gratification is better than instant gratification.
Oh, I told you. Nick, you should be sick more often. You need more rest. That's brilliant. Right.
From a mental health point of view, I mean.
Yeah, so what? If you can wait for something and plan for it, you're actually going to get a better result or more sort of mental satisfaction.
Yeah, more. It's the satisfaction is deeper and more genuine than if you just constantly getting instant gratification, and that actually can lead to addiction and depression.
Okay, brilliant. We all love addiction and depression. And then, I think you've nailed. For me, the obvious reason to disagree is that there are many things which you can only get if you plan because they take time. So, for example, I don't know, buying a house or, saving money for a special holiday or something like that.
Yeah.
It can't be done immediately. Yep. So, if you don't plan, you're never going to be able to do the bigger things in life. I thought that was kind of like the more obvious argument, but I didn't know what the second one was. But I think your argument you've added there, boom.
Could be the second one.
That's enough.
And that includes a nice little bit of comparison in both arguments, actually, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you could talk about, in some ways, well, some people think that blah, 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 but actually, Couldn't
we
you?
can offer balance, right? And if you don't know what balance is, you're going to have to go quite far back in the blog post, but click on the writing at blog.myieltsclassroom.com. Go way back before the podcast start and you'll see a nice little picture of a pair of scales that says, how can I add balance to my agree-disagree essay? Now, I am going to talk about something a bit different here, Nick. And I don't know if we've ever discussed this on the podcast before. I'm going to do a lesson with our students in the coming weeks about this, because this question actually, although it's saying to what extent do you agree or disagree, it's essentially asking us to compare two things, isn't it? It's, enjoying the present is better than planning for the future. Okay. I've noticed that IELTS don't explicitly ask you ever to write a comparison essay, because that is a particular type of essay that we teach at universities. But they often have agree-disagree essays where they give you two things. So it might be something, like governments should invest more in rail than road. So really it's asking you to answer that question
the benefits of both,
you've got to compare. So the way I might approach this, and this is a new way that I've not spoken about before, is we could actually write this as very similar to a best way.
So you could focus on like the present in paragraph 1 and then the future in paragraph 2, basically.
Yes. So on the one hand, I concede that, in some situation, enjoying the present is important. A lot of people live their lives always looking to the future, but the future never really comes. A lot of people, when they save, they live a completely frugal, miserable life for months and months and months for one day of joy. So you could have a paragraph that says, the present is, you're living for the present. There are arguments why some people may want to live for the present. However, I still feel that it's more important to plan for the future, and then put just one paragraph with one or two arguments for why planning for the future is better.
Okay.
So it's really the same as a best way.
Yeah, very similar.
I would say for lower level students, that could be an easier way to approach this type of question. I still think, though, doing it, if you can have two clear arguments for why planning is better with some balance, is definitely going to get you up to a higher level.
Yeah.
But a more simplistic approach, if you're given these sort of compare, start with the one you don't agree with, or whatever that is, and then look at the second one. But I think the key to this will definitely be, for a lot of students, when you get philosophical, back up your arguments with an example. Because, if you're trying to make a philosophical argument and your English is not great, that example can help the examiner understand what you're talking about. So, yes. All right, brilliant. Let's do number 5.
More and more people say that they do not feel safe when they leave their home. Why is this, and what could be done to address the issue?
So, people say they do not feel safe when they leave home. I'm going to be honest, Nick. I saw this question in more than one place. So, I'm guessing it may be a topic, but for me, the reason I've chosen this one is, do you think that's true, that people don't feel safe when they leave home?
I guess somewhere in some countries it's probably true, yeah.
Right, so the reason I've chosen this is a good example of a question which may be true in the country or the culture where the exam writer lives, but may not be true
in your culture or country.
In your culture, right? Because I am pretty sure that some of our listeners are like, what? Why would somebody feel safe or not feel safe when they leave home? To be honest, that's a little bit what I'm thinking. Why then? I mean, I am genuinely looking for help here. Why do you think some people may not feel safe when they leave home?
Well, I guess the main reason is probably fear of crime.
Right. And this is exactly what I thought students were going to say. And what will the danger be here?
You might get beaten up.
What?
Oh,
well,
you mean in the argument?
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Well,
the danger. Yeah. What do you think
probably the
students are going to
solution.
say? Well, I don't. I think what students are going to say, rather than saying some people feel safe when they leave home because there could be a lot of adolescents on the street. They worry that they may get shouted at or maybe
Beaten up.
feel intimidated, walking past them on the pavement. Our students won't come up with small, low-level crime like graffiti or antisocial behaviour. What will our students say?
I might get murdered.
If you're going to use crime, and I do think crime could be a cause here.
Be subtle.
Keep it realistic, please. All right. What actual crime would make people afraid to go outside? I think it could be more stuff like verbal abuse,
low-level petty thuggery.
Yes. Pickpocketing or something.
Pickpocketing. I think people I don't think people would be that afraid of verbal abuse. I do think it's like people would be scared of getting beaten up or something, or pushed around, or not murdered, but
yeah,
maybe. When I was younger, I used to be scared of going out.
Yeah, well, okay,
because
that
big
could
boys
be true,
used to be, on bikes, and a couple of my friends did get beaten up a couple of times.
But maybe, though, we should be focusing on, it says more and more people. Ooh, so it's the change. So if we're going to say or talk about crime, why would there be more crime today? Or what has changed to lead to this situation?
Well, I think this would be a good one to use, the pandemic.
This is exactly.
So first of all, you could say that people are afraid to go outside because they're afraid of coronavirus.
Yes.
And secondly, you could say that because of the economic impact, there is more crime. It's more dangerous to go outside.
Yes.
So we talked about being topical, didn't we? Last time. You can use the pandemic in your arguments.
Well, no, totally. And also, if we think about being afraid to go outside, if you've been in lockdown or at home...
Maybe you got used to being at home and watching Netflix and having cups of tea.
You could be a bit agoraphobic. It's like me. So actually, you may suddenly, for some reason, find the noise and the sort of... It might be a bit overwhelming when you go outside because there's so much happening, so busy. So I think... Yeah, I would say anytime it says more and more people or, something is changing.
Something's changed, yeah, that's a good one.
Try and focus on the change, and then I would say, depending on what those causes are, if the cause is people are afraid of COVID, what can be done to address the problem? Face masks, antiseptic hand wipes, maybe going out late or late at night or early in the morning when there are fewer people.
Yeah, it's
like your solutions are going to depend.
Exactly. I think you could actually think of some better solutions if you focused on. Everyone knows how to solve the pandemic in their own head.
Yeah.
So.
For crime, I'm not sure. Maybe we go back to community policing. Actually,
yeah,
Nick.
We could use the same argument, couldn't we?
Yeah. Or maybe it could be, building more connections within a community. So having sort of more community events so that like younger people know the older people. Yeah. Bit of a weird question that. Not sure if that really is a topic.
It's a good one though. I like that. And the more and more people thing is definitely what you should focus on rather than
I do think that unlocks
safe.
it.
Yeah.
Thinking about the change, definitely. Okay, so... Final question. Are we ready? Let's do it.
Information technology is changing many aspects of our lives and now dominates our home, leisure and work activities. Do the benefits of information technology outweigh the disadvantages? So,
can you guess, Nick, why I've chosen this question? Because to be perfectly honest, information technology is probably one of the friendliest topics that a student can have in the test. We all use IT.
We do.
We can all talk about, social media, communication technology, all of that sort of stuff.
Internet.
So why just internet? Why do you think I've chosen it then for us to discuss? Because I think there is something tricky about it.
I'm not sure, to be honest. Go on, tell me. You'll have to tell me here.
I think it's kind of interesting that in that first setup sentence, it says it's changing many aspects of our life and now dominates our home, leisure and work activities. Do you think a student should include at least one aspect of home, leisure and work in their advantages and disadvantages?
Yes, I do.
I do as well. And I think it's kind of tricky because you probably can't have an advantages and disadvantages for both because we just don't have the space, do we?
Well, that would be 6 arguments.
Yeah, so I think you're going to have to... Divide it or think of broad arguments. So, something
touch on all of them.
Yeah, so like you could have a broad argument. I don't know, if it was a negative, it could be something like people today spend more time on social media than they do
with their real family.
Communicating face to face. For example, it's not uncommon for every family member in a home to be sat in the same room
on their phones.
but looking at their phone and actually doing something different. So to have the argument, but use the example somewhere in the essay, one example for home, one for leisure, one for work. Of those, home, leisure and work, which do you think is the trickiest to actually come up with an idea for?
Well, while you were chatting there, I was just thinking about it, and I would probably use work as an example as a positive.
Yeah.
That it's
I think work is wholly positive.
You know, that you don't have to go to the office to go to work. That technology, that technology has really changed how we work, made it more efficient.
Yes, everything's faster and more efficient, definitely.
And I would actually probably use a very similar argument for leisure. I would say the same can be true for leisure as well. We've got more opportunities for leisure because of technology. We can do different things. I would maybe try to think of an example or two.
Leisure's a bit tricky because I don't really know how IT helps us so much in our leisure time.
Well, I would use an example like you can find out about different leisure activities much more easily.
Oh, that's good.
That you can get to different leisure activities much more easily with technology, like using GPS, for example. Yeah. And then I would probably focus on home as a negative.
Yeah, I'm thinking actually you could probably have a broader argument for negatives about it's made us more sedentary. Mm-hmm. And then you could say, you know, because people can work from home, they don't have incidental exercise. Good. They may prefer to like play a computer game. So you could sort of, Mm-hmm. I mean, I just think there's loads of scope here for ideas. I don't think students would struggle with ideas, but I do think you want to write them down.
Make sure you touch on all three of those aspects.
Yeah, and make sure you've got enough, you know, I would say the benefits. I mean, I would agree that the benefits outweigh the disadvantages.
Probably, yeah.
But just think, how are you going to argue for it? How can you include everything? What will go in each paragraph? Because I think students can get a little bit lost maybe in this one with too many ideas.
Possibly.
So, yeah, those ones where they give you 2 or 3 specific... I always think when they give you 2 things, if it just said home and work, it'd be all right, wouldn't it? Because you could do an advantage and a disadvantage for both. Mm-hmm. But adding that leisure, so there's 3...
does make it a little bit more difficult for sure.
Yeah, it just makes it tricky. So just think about that. You know, if you ever get a question where there are 3 elements, make sure you include all of them. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Nick, that was our nice, relaxing... I always enjoy doing these. And
nice
I have
and simple,
to say, mate, you on fire today. So well done. I think Nick should start his own ideas factory. So that was this week. Next week, I am hoping that we will have the episode where we talk about how to develop ideas in a body paragraph. So that's a big one. It's something I've been planning to do for a long time. So if that's something you need help with, you know, you've got the ideas, but you don't know how to build those paragraphs, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. My IELTS Classroom podcast is a production of My IELTS Classroom Limited. Nick and I do not represent IELTS, and everything you heard in this episode is our own personal opinion. You can find the show notes and transcript for this episode on our blog. That's www.blog.myieltsclassroom.com. And if you're looking for our video courses, speaking lessons, and marking service, you can find them at www.myieltsclassroom.com. If you have a question or query or just want to chat, you can email Nick and I at hello@myieltsclassroom.com. Our theme music is by Heartbeat and our artwork is produced by David Brown. Have a great week, study hard, and remember,
this is My IELTS Classroom.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you found the content useful, please click like to help the channel and don't forget to subscribe for new lessons every Friday. Plus, you can find more expert content at www.myieltsclassroom.com.